do?
Why don't we just wait here for a little while, see what happens?
What if you couldn't trust your own eyes? What if the person standing next to you, your colleague, your friend, was no longer human, but something that had learned to wear their skin perfectly? In the summer of 1982, America fell in love with a visitor who just wanted to phone home. But John Carpenter introduced us to a visitor with a much darker ambition. It didn't want to call home. It wanted the inside of us to be home. It was the summer of aliens. On one screen, Steven Spielberg's E.T. offered a warm, messianic embrace from the stars. But in the theater next door, Carpenter offered a biological violation. The Thing was not simply another horror film. It was a vision of total distrust, a study of identity under siege, of bodies that could no longer be trusted, and of a humanity stripped of its certainty. Beneath its surface lay a worldview steeped in absolute pessimism. It suggested that in the face of an indifferent universe, survival might require the abandonment of compassion. It was a technical marvel that redefined what cinematic effects could do for an audience, pushing the human form until it snapped into something unrecognizable. But the world wasn't ready to look into that mirror. In 1982, the reaction was brutal. Critics dismissed the film as instant junk, deriding its imagery as repellent and joyless. Audiences, seeking the optimism of the early Reagan era, stayed away. The film failed, buried in the box office snow. Yet time has a way of revealing the truth. Over the subsequent 4 decades, The Thing began to thaw. It was reassessed, re-examined, and ultimately recognized as the definitive horror film of the late Cold War.
I don't know what the hell's in there, but it's weird and pissed off, whatever it is.
It captured a specific frequency of anxiety. The fear that the enemy is not just at the gates, but has already been assimilated into the social fabric. To understand the narrative engine driving The Thing, the trail leads far beyond the soundstage and into the pages of early science fiction pulp. Long before John Carpenter's cameras rolled, the story already existed, buried in ink. The foundation was laid in August 1938 with the publication of Who Goes There, written by John W. Campbell Jr. under the pseudonym Don A. Stewart. Unlike the 1951 adaptation, The Thing from Another World, which reimagined the creature as a hulking, plant-like invader, Campbell's original story introduced the idea that would ultimately define Carpenter's film, the shapeshifter. In the novella, the alien is not a singular monster, but a cellular imitator, capable of absorbing and perfectly replicating any living organism. The cinematic legacy of The Thing begins not with Carpenter, but with Howard Hawks' 1951 production, The Thing from Another World, directed by Christian Nyby. A landmark of Cold War science fiction, the film became a staple of the era, but in the process, it abandoned the most radical element of Campbell's story. The shapeshifter was replaced by a singular physical creature, an identifiable monster that could be confronted, pursued, and ultimately destroyed. For John Carpenter, a lifelong admirer of Howard Hawks, the prospect of remaking The Thing from Another World was daunting. He regarded the original as a classic of American science fiction and had little interest in revisiting it, simply for nostalgia's sake.
The Thing was a very early pioneer of this kind of flying saucer monster from Mars movie. It took hold in the 50s and became a big baby boomer favorite.
What ultimately drew him in was not the film itself, but the opportunity to return to the source material. John W. Campbell's concept of an enemy that could look like anyone and be everyone offered something fundamentally different. Carpenter did not view the project as a remake, but a chance to finally bring the story's central paranoia to the screen. By the early 1980s, Carpenter was already firmly established as one of the most distinctive voices in American horror. With Assault on Precinct 13, he demonstrated his ability to generate tension through atmosphere and minimalist staging. Halloween laid the foundation for the modern slasher film through restraint and implication rather than spectacle. The Fog further refined his command of mood, pacing, and dread, proving he could sustain terror without relying on graphic violence. Together, these films positioned Carpenter as a filmmaker uniquely suited to Campbell's story. His recurring themes of siege, isolation, and institutional collapse aligned perfectly with the world of The Thing. The project came to him through producers David Foster and Lawrence Terman, who had secured the rights to Who Goes There and were seeking a director capable of modernizing the material while honoring its psychological roots. Carpenter proposed a bleak, effects-driven thriller rooted in suspicion rather than action. The producers supported his vision, even as it pushed the material far beyond the tone of the 1951 adaptation. The screenplay was written by Bill Lancaster, son of actor Burt Lancaster. From its earliest drafts, the script moved deliberately away from traditional genre conventions. Female characters present in earlier versions, including the romantic subplot of the 1951 film, were removed entirely. The result was an isolated, all-male environment, a decision that proved crucial to the film's psychological texture. As Kurt Russell later observed, without women present, the men had no one to posture for. Fear, insecurity, dominance, and suspicion were stripped bare, with nothing to soften the descent into mistrust.
12 guys begin to mistrust and distrust and be so leery of each other that they're barely able to function.
As production advanced, the script continued to evolve alongside the special effects. Rob Bottin's increasingly ambitious creature designs, including the Norris chest defibrillation sequence and the spider head transformation, demanded structural adjustments. Lancaster rewrote scenes to accommodate these moments, allowing the effects themselves to dictate pacing, escalation, and narrative rhythm. In The Thing, spectacle did not interrupt the story. It became part of the story. John Carpenter would later describe The Thing as the opening movement in what became known as his Apocalypse trilogy, followed by Prince of Darkness in 1987 and In the Mouth of Madness in 1994. Each presents a universe that is indifferent at best and actively hostile at worst. Carpenter's worldview was explicitly Lovecraftian. The cosmos offers no protection, no moral balance, and no reassurance. Knowledge does not save humanity. It only reveals how small and vulnerable it truly is. This perspective ran counter to the dominant science fiction mood of 1982.
How much more of this crap is there?
If you're a fan of 80s practical effects and stories like this, there are more videos coming soon. Make sure you hit the like and subscribe button so you don't miss them. Casting The Thing was an unusually deliberate process. Carpenter and his producers were not searching for glamorous stars or heroic types, but for faces that suggested exhaustion and experience. The inhabitants of Outpost 31 needed to feel like working men accustomed to long hours, harsh conditions, and emotional restraint. These were blue-collar professionals, not action heroes. Because the film functions as an ensemble, every role had to feel authentic. Today, R.J. MacReady is inseparable from Kurt Russell, but that casting was far from inevitable. Early drafts of the script were written with Harrison Ford in mind, whose post-Star Wars popularity made him an attractive option for the studio. Ford would have brought confidence and competence to the role, though perhaps without the underlying weariness that ultimately defined the character. Clint Eastwood was also discussed an embodiment of stoic authority, whose presence would have pushed the film toward a more traditional Western dynamic.
Tell me, isn't the sheriff supposed to be courageous, loyal, and above all honest?
Other actors entered the conversation as well. Nick Nolte declined the role outright, despite possessing the physicality that matched the film's abrasive tone. Jeff Bridges passed, a choice that might have produced a more introspective and cerebral MacReady. Christopher Walken represented one of the project's great what-ifs, an unpredictable presence who could have infused the character with instability and psychological menace. Kevin Kline met with Carpenter but was ultimately dismissed by the studio, which questioned his box office draw at the time. Ultimately, Carpenter returned to Kurt Russell, his collaborator on Elvis in 1979, and Escape from New York 2 years later. By the early 1980s, Russell had completed one of the most dramatic reinventions in American cinema, shedding his child star image in favor of hardened, morally ambiguous characters.
John was trying to cast the role of MacReady, and we spent some time together talking about that, trying to think of other actors. I wasn't involved with the movie.
His version of R.J. MacReady stands apart from traditional genre protagonists. He is not a commanding officer or a natural leader. He drinks heavily, he gambles, he loses. In one of the film's most revealing moments, he pours whiskey into a chess computer after being checkmated, a small act of petulance that defines the character. MacReady assumes authority as the rest of the team fall apart. Leadership is not his ambition. If the alien represents the external threat, the film's internal conflict is embodied in the tension between MacReady and Childs, the station's chief mechanic. Their relationship forms the emotional spine of the story, two men locked in opposition, neither willing to yield authority, neither fully trusting the other. Casting the role required an actor capable of matching Russell both physically and in screen presence. Several names were discussed during development, including Jeffrey Holder, Carl Weathers, and Bernie Casey. Isaac Hayes was also considered, having previously worked with Carpenter on Escape from New York. For a time, Ernie Hudson emerged as the frontrunner and came close to securing the role. Ultimately, the production met with Keith David, a stage-trained actor with little film exposure, but formidable intensity. His audition immediately shifted the direction of the character. David's performance brought discipline, volatility, and simmering resentment to Childs, transforming him into more than a supporting figure.
Then kill me.
The supporting cast was essential to the film's realism. Each man at Outpost 31 needed to feel like someone who had earned his place there, not through heroism, but through endurance. Richard Mazur was cast as Clark, the dog handler whose emotional detachment from people makes him an early suspect. Mazur famously turned down a role in E.T. to join the Thing, drawn to the character's isolation. He later described Clark as someone who simply trusted animals more than humans. Wilford Brimley was cast as Blair, the station's biologist. Though widely associated with older characters, Brimley was only 47 during filming. His portrayal charts one of the film's most disturbing arcs, the slow transformation from scientific rationalist to paranoid prophet, as knowledge itself becomes psychologically destructive. Donald Moffat played Gary, the station commander, imbuing the role with bureaucratic rigidity. His authority exists on paper, but quickly erodes once crisis replaces protocol.
What can we do? What can we do?
Thomas G. Waits portrayed Windows, the communications operator. The character underwent multiple name changes during development, from Sanchez to Sanders, before being rechristened Windows, after Waits arrived at a costume fitting wearing dark sunglasses. The nickname stuck, becoming one of the film's most memorable identifiers. Richard Dysart was cast as Dr. Copper at the last possible moment, after William Daniels and Brian Dennehy were both considered. His calm, paternal presence lends weight to his fate, making his sudden, brutal death one of the film's most shocking ruptures. Charles Hallahan played Norris the geologist. Peter Maloney was cast as Bennings the meteorologist. Joel Polis was cast as Fuchs the assistant biologist in his first movie role. His background until this point had mostly been theater. T.K. Carter plays Niles the cook and had starred in several movies by the time he was cast in the film. David Clennon played Palmer the mechanic. His character is the resident stoner in the group. Among the film's most celebrated performances belongs not to a human actor, but to Jed, the canine performer, who portrayed the dog thing during the film's opening act, a hybrid of wolf and Alaskan Malamute. Jed was trained by Clint Rowe and possessed an uncanny ability to follow marks, maintain eye lines, and project an unsettling stillness.
He did everything like a wolf. He would never bark, he never growled, but the minute he would become uncomfortable, he would just suddenly go.
To create the film's oppressive sense of cold, production relied on a deliberate fusion of hostile location shooting and meticulously engineered studio environments. Exterior sequences depicting Outpost 31 and the remains of the Norwegian camp were filmed near Stewart, British Columbia, on the Salmon Glacier. The site was selected for its accessibility and dependable snow cover. To control costs, the Norwegian base was not built from scratch. Instead, it was created from the burned remains of the American camp set, redressed and reconfigured to appear as a separate installation. Interior scenes were filmed at Universal Studios in Los Angeles, but comfort was not part of the design. The sound stages were refrigerated to approximately 4 degrees Celsius, cold enough to ensure that every breath visible on screen was real. The film opens not with exposition, but with confusion. A helicopter chasing a dog across the ice. The men firing from the cockpit appear frantic, irrational, and violent until the meaning of their words is understood. The pilot, played by producer Larry Franco, shouts warnings in Norwegian that went largely unnoticed by English-speaking audiences for decades. In other words, the entire mystery of the Thing is explained within its first 5 minutes. This revelation transforms the opening sequence into one of the most tragic in horror cinema. The Norwegians are not aggressors. They are not insane. They are attempting to prevent the extinction of humanity, and they fail not because they are wrong, but because they cannot be understood. By the time the Americans realize the truth, it is already too late.
If none of us make it, at least there'll be some kind of record.
At just 22 years old, Rob Bottin was placed in charge of one of the most ambitious effects productions in cinema history.
John actually did give me a great opportunity to say, hey kid, go nuts,
The scope of the work quickly became overwhelming. Bottin essentially lived on set, working around the clock as designs were revised, rebuilt, and reimagined under intense time pressure. What emerged was not a monster with a design logic, but a series of biological crises, bodies collapsing into themselves and reforming into something worse. The disturbing realism of The Thing was achieved through a nightmarish combination of household products and industrial materials. Every texture was engineered to appear moist, unstable, and freshly alive. Heated bubblegum was stretched into sinews and tendons, most famously during the spiderhead sequence, where elasticity was essential. Strawberry jam provided thick, dark, coagulated blood. Mixtures of mayonnaise and creamed corn created the pale yellow and white fluids that suggested internal decay rather than simple gore. Gelatin and commercial food thickeners formed the foundation of the film's ever-present slime. To ensure the creatures reflected light with an unsettling sheen, 5-gallon buckets of KY jelly were applied liberally across nearly every effects setup. Foam latex served as the primary skin material, allowing puppets to flex, blister, and tear. Beneath the surface, urethane and fiberglass provided rigid skeletal structures capable of supporting violent mechanical movement. Nothing was simulated. Everything existed physically in front of the camera. In The Thing, horror does not feel imagined. It feels manufactured, assembled, and barely held together long enough for the camera to capture it. Few moments in horror cinema remain as shocking as the death of Norris.
Clear.
As Dr. Copper attempts defibrillation, the patient's chest cavity suddenly splits open, transforming into a mouth that clamps down and severs the doctor's arms.
Because it was a one-take situation. We had to make him up and blend this whole body off that had this interior mechanism that would rip open.
To achieve the effect, the production hired a double amputee to stand in for actor Richard Dysart during the critical shot. Prosthetic forearms were constructed from wax bones, rubber veins, and gelatin compounds designed to tear convincingly under pressure. The chest mechanism itself was operated hydraulically. When triggered, the jaws snapped shut, shearing through the prosthetic arms and producing a tearing motion so authentic that many viewers believed it to be optical trickery. As production escalated toward the film's climax, Bottin became overwhelmed by the scale of the remaining creature work. To prevent delays, special effects legend Stan Winston was brought in to design and execute the dog thing transformation sequence. Winston agreed on one condition: he would remain uncredited, allowing the film's effects to stand under Bottin's name alone. By the end of production, the physical toll was severe. Bottin was hospitalized, suffering from exhaustion and pneumonia. Shortly after filming, wrapped.
This is bullshit, Mac.
The matte paintings for The Thing were created by Albert Whitlock, one of the most influential visual effects artists in cinema history. Whitlock was responsible for the film's alien spacecraft matte painting, extending the physical set into a vast, buried structure beneath the ice. Over a career spanning more than 50 years, he produced effects work on hundreds of films and was a frequent collaborator with Alfred Hitchcock on projects including The Birds, Marnie. By the early 1980s, Whitlock was Universal's senior matte artist and a multiple Academy Award winner. The miniature of the alien craft was designed by model maker Suzanne Turner, who shot the spaceship with a motion-controlled camera against a matte background. Cinematography was handled by longtime Carpenter collaborator Dean Cundy, who gave The Thing its visual style. Rather than using expressive shadows or stylized lighting, Cundy favored a controlled approach. Interiors are illuminated by practical sources: overhead fluorescents, desk lamps, emergency lighting. The result is a visual environment that feels industrial rather than theatrical, a workplace slowly turning hostile. Wide Panavision compositions reinforce isolation. Movement is equally deliberate. The camera rarely rushes. Slow dollies and creeping push-ins mirror the creature's methodology.
Where's the rest?
Although John Carpenter had composed the music for most of his earlier films, he sought a different voice for The Thing. He turned to Ennio Morricone, one of cinema's most celebrated composers, in search of a colder, more European sensibility. The resulting main theme is often mistaken for one of Carpenter's own synthesizer compositions. In reality, the pulsing bass line was Morricone's orchestral imitation of Carpenter's style, a slow, repetitive rhythm resembling a heartbeat that is too heavy and too deliberate to be comforting. Morricone recorded a full orchestral score, complete with swelling strings and dramatic crescendos. Yet during editing, Carpenter gravitated toward the simplest cues. Much of the lush orchestration was left unused, replaced by restrained electronic textures that mirrored the film's emotional numbness. To bridge tonal gaps, Carpenter and longtime collaborator Alan Howarth recorded additional cues, uncredited, weaving them subtly into the soundscape. When The Thing arrived in theaters, the response was swift and merciless.
John Carpenter's The Thing.
Critics condemned the film as nihilistic, joyless, and grotesque. Many found its relentless pessimism exhausting and its practical effects overwhelming. The hostility was not measured, it was personal. Roger Ebert described the film as a great barf bag movie, questioning whether spectacle had replaced substance, and dismissing it as a cinematic geek show. In Starlog magazine, critic Alan Spencer delivered perhaps the harshest assessment, arguing that Carpenter was ill-suited to science fiction altogether. Many have argued the primary reason for The Thing's failure was timing, releasing just after E.T. Although neither John Carpenter nor screenwriter Bill Lancaster intended the film as a metaphor for the emerging AIDS crisis, which was only beginning to enter public awareness in 1982. The parallels soon became impossible to ignore. The blood test sequence functions as the film's emotional and symbolic center. Fear of infected blood, the impossibility of visual confirmation, the terror that the carrier may appear completely healthy. Over 4 decades, viewers have dissected the ending frame by frame. Some point to visible breath, MacReady's vapor apparent, while Childs seems absent. Others argue this is a lighting inconsistency, compounded by the fact that the thing perfectly replicates physiology. Another theory suggests the shared bottle contains gasoline rather than whiskey, a trap MacReady sets to test Childs, yet the creature absorbs memories. It would know the taste. Earlier scenes also show the characters sharing the same bottles freely. In 2011, Universal released The Thing, directed by Matthijs van Heiningen Jr. The film functions as a direct prequel, depicting the events at the Norwegian base moments before Carpenter's opening scene. Originally, the prequel relied heavily on practical effects created by Amalgamated Dynamics. Animatronics were built. Then, late in post-production, studio executives intervened. Concerned the effects appeared too 80s. These effects were digitally erased and replaced with CGI. The tactile weight that defined the original vanished, replaced by CGI that critics and audiences reacted very negatively to. In 2002, Computer Artworks released a video game sequel for PlayStation 2 and Xbox. Its defining innovation was a fear and trust system. Non-player characters could panic, disobey orders, or even attack the player if they suspected infection. John Carpenter voiced a character in the game and has repeatedly referred to it as the canonical continuation of his story. Since 2020, development discussions have continued around a new adaptation produced by Blumhouse Pictures. Early reports suggested a faithful version of Frozen Hell, the full original 112-page version of Campbell's Who Goes There. Rediscovered in 2017, this version includes an additional 45 pages of material, providing more backstory and context of a shape-shifting alien terrorizing an isolated Antarctic research team.
It's a crock of shit.
Throughout 2025, Carpenter has confirmed involvement, stating only, "We're working on it." Whether the project continues MacReady's story or begins again remains intentionally unclear.
You see, when a man bleeds, it's just tissue.
More than 4 decades later, The Thing remains the gold standard for practical effects, a masterclass in cinematic tension and storytelling. At least now, it has garnered the respect it deserves as a classic horror movie.
Nobody trusts anybody now. Or
very tired.